The autumn wind whistled through the community garden of Millbrook, Massachusetts, carrying the crisp scent of fallen leaves and the first hint of winter's approach. It was here, beside an ancient stone well that had witnessed generations of town history, that Scout, a 3-year-old German shepherd, had maintained his inexplicable vigil for the past week. His amber eyes never strayed from the well's weathered stones, and his ears remained perpetually alert, twitching at every sound that emanated from its depths. Sarah Foster, Scout's owner, stood at the garden's wrought iron gate, her breath visible in the early morning air as she called out to him for what felt like the 100th time. "Scout, come on, boy. Please come home." Her voice carried a mixture of concern and exhaustion, but Scout merely whined in response, pressing his body closer to the well's stone base. The well itself was a remnant of Millbrook's colonial past, its gray stones worn smooth by centuries of rope burns and weather. Originally the primary water source for the settlement's first families, it now served as the centerpiece of the Highland Community Garden, where local residents tended to their plots of vegetables and flowers. But over the past week, the well had become something else entirely, a source of growing unease that rippled through the tight-knit community. Firefighter Emma Taylor watched this scene unfold from her position by Engine 27, parked just outside the garden's entrance. She was new to Millbrook Fire Department, having transferred from Boston just 3 months ago. But something about Scout's behavior struck a chord deep within her. In her decade of service, she learned to trust an animal's instincts. They often sensed danger long before humans caught on. "Still at it, huh?" Captain Michael Richardson's voice startled Emma from her observations. The veteran firefighter had approached silently, his weathered face creased with both amusement and concern as he watched Sarah make another failed attempt to coax Scout away. "7 days now, Cap," Emma replied, her fingers absently tracing the department patch on her uniform. "That's not normal behavior, even for a devoted dog." "Something's wrong," Captain Richardson sighed, running a hand through his salt and pepper hair. "Taylor, we're firefighters, not pet psychologists. Unless that well's on fire or someone's fallen in, it's not our jurisdiction." But Emma couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something crucial. She'd responded to enough calls where animals had alerted their owners to gas leaks, structural problems, or other hidden dangers. Scout's fixation seemed different, though more desperate, more focused. The garden had become a regular stop on her patrol route, and she'd spent hours observing the scene, noting how Scout would occasionally paw at specific stones, how his whines would increase in pitch when anyone approached too closely. She'd even noticed how he refused food unless it was brought directly to him at his post. Local residents had begun to take notice too. Mary Chun, who tended to a plot of heirloom tomatoes near the well, had started bringing Scout water and treats. Other gardeners would pause in their work to watch him, their conversations dropping to whispers as they speculated about what could drive such dedicated vigilance. "Maybe he's sensing something structural," Emma suggested to her captain, knowing she was pushing her luck but unable to let it go. "The well's old. There could be subsidence issues, hidden chambers. We should at least check it out, run some basic safety tests." Captain Richardson's expression softened slightly. He'd known Emma long enough to recognize when she was operating on more than just rookie enthusiasm. "Tell you what, do a preliminary assessment on your own time. If you find anything concrete, anything at all that suggests a public safety issue, I'll authorize a full inspection." Emma nodded. "Already, men." Tally cataloging the equipment she'd need. She'd learned to read her captain's moods during her short time in Millbrook, and this was as close to approval as she was likely to get. As she watched Sarah make one final attempt to retrieve Scout before heading to work, Emma began formulating a plan. The garden was quieter in the evenings, when most of the regulars had gone home. Emma used this time to conduct her initial survey, bringing basic safety equipment and a powerful flashlight. Scout watched her intently but didn't interfere as she circled the well, examining the stonework and testing for structural movement. The well's construction was solid, typical of colonial-era craftsmanship. The stones fit together precisely, with minimal mortar deterioration considering their age. But something about the pattern of Scout's attention drew Emma to focus on the northeastern section, where the dog spent most of his time. As she ran her gloved hands over the stones, Emma felt a slight irregularity. A gap that shouldn't be there, barely wide enough to notice unless you were looking for it. Shining her flashlight into the crevice, something caught the beam and reflected it back. A glint of metal, wedged between the stones. Emma's heart rate quickened as she carefully worked the object free. It was a watch, a woman's timepiece with delicate hands frozen at 3:47. The back was engraved, "To Rachel, all my love, Mom." The name stirred something in Emma's memory. She'd seen it recently, possibly in a report or news article. A quick search on her phone confirmed her suspicion. Rachel Morgan, age 24, reported missing 3 weeks ago from neighboring Ashfield. The case had made local news due to the suspicious circumstances of her disappearance. Last seen leaving her workplace, her car found abandoned in a shopping center parking lot. Scout's behavior suddenly took on a far more ominous significance. Emma's hands trembled slightly as she photographed the watch in situ and carefully bagged it. This wasn't just about structural integrity anymore. This was potential evidence of something far darker. The night air seemed to grow colder as Emma looked down at Scout, who met her gaze with an intensity that sent chills down her spine. What else did those dark waters hide? What secrets had this colonial well kept buried for who knew how long? As she packed up her equipment, Emma's training kicked in. This was no longer just a curious case of canine behavior. This was now a potential rescue operation, or worse. She needed to convince Captain Richardson to authorize a full investigation, and she needed to do it fast. The drive back to the station was a blur of racing thoughts and possibilities. Emma's mind kept returning to the watch, to Scout's unwavering vigilance, to the dark depths of that ancient well. She'd come to Millbrook seeking a quieter life after the intensity of Boston's fire service, but it seemed that even small towns had their share of darkness, and she'd just scratched the surface. The weight of her discovery pressed against her chest as she pulled into the station's parking lot. The night shift was just beginning, and through the bay windows, she could see Captain Richardson in his office, poring over paperwork. Emma took a deep breath, gathered her evidence, and prepared to make her case. Sometimes the hardest part of being a firefighter wasn't facing the flames. It was convincing others to see the smoke before the fire began. As she walked toward the captain's office, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Scout's vigil had opened a door to something much larger, much darker than anyone in Millbrook could have imagined. And now that the door was open, there would be no closing it until all its secrets were brought into the light. The fluorescent lights of the station buzzed overhead as Emma knocked on Captain Richardson's door, the sealed evidence bag containing Rachel Morgan's watch fee, lying impossibly heavy in her pocket. The next few minutes would determine whether she could convince her superior that Scout's strange behavior warranted a full investigation and possibly save lives in the process. Captain Richardson looked up from his desk, his reading glasses perched on the end of his nose, as Emma entered his office. The small room smelled of coffee and printer paper, its walls covered with certificates, commendations, and faded photographs of fires long since extinguished. Emma had always found it comforting, this testament to years of service and lives saved. But tonight the photos seemed to watch her with new intensity. "Taylor," he acknowledged, removing his glasses. "I thought your shift ended an hour ago." Emma placed the evidence bag on his desk without preamble. "I found this wedged between the stones of the well, sir, right where Scout's been focusing his attention." The captain leaned forward, examining the watch through the clear plastic. His expression remained neutral, but Emma noticed the slight tightening around his eyes as he read the inscription. "Rachel Morgan," he said quietly. "The missing person case from Ashfield." "Yes, sir. And I don't think it's a coincidence that Scout started his vigil around the same time she disappeared." Richardson sat back in his chair, steepling his fingers. The clock on his wall ticked loudly in the silence. "You realize this changes things," he said finally. "This isn't just a structural inspection anymore. We'll need to coordinate with police, possibly bring in search and rescue teams." "I know, sir, but we need to move quickly. If there's any chance." He held up a hand, already reaching for his phone. "Agreed. I'll make the calls now. But Taylor?" He fixed her with a stern look. "This stays quiet for now. The last thing we need is panic spreading through town before we know what we're dealing with." Emma nodded, relief flooding through her. As she left the office, she could hear the captain's voice behind her. already arranging for an emergency response team. Outside, the night had grown darker, and a thin fog was rolling in from the river, wreathing the station in ghostly tendrils. Her phone buzzed, a text from Sarah Foster. "Scout still won't come home. He seems more agitated tonight. Should I be worried?" Emma stared at the message, choosing her words carefully. "Keep him there if you can. We're conducting an inspection of the well tomorrow morning. It might help us understand what's bothering him." The response came quickly. "Thank God someone's finally taking this seriously. I'll bring him breakfast early." Emma pocketed her phone and looked up at the star-scattered sky. Tomorrow would bring answers, but tonight, in the quiet darkness of Millbrook, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were standing on the edge of something terrible. Scout had been trying to tell them something all along. Now they just had to be brave enough to listen. The next morning dawned gray and cold, with a heavy mist clinging to the ground like a funeral shroud. Emma arrived at the garden before sunrise to find an emergency response team already setting up floodlights and equipment around the well. Scout watched the activity with intense focus, his tail low but his posture alert. Sarah Foster stood nearby, hugging herself against the cold, her face pale with worry. "They wouldn't tell me what's going on," she said as Emma approached. "But it's bad, isn't it? Scout's been trying to warn us about something bad." Emma placed a gentle hand on the woman's shoulder. "We're going to find out. You and Scout did the right thing, staying vigilant. Sometimes the hardest part is getting others to listen." The garden, usually a place of peace and growth, had been transformed into a command center. Portable generators hummed, powering the lights that cut through the morning gloom. Emma could see the strain on Captain Richardson's face as he coordinated with the VA. RIAS teams, fire department personnel, police officers, and specialists in confined space operations. As the sun began to rise, casting long shadows across the frost-covered ground, the first phase of the operation began. A camera was lowered into the well, its feed displayed on a monitor that drew a crowd of tense observers. The murky water below revealed little at first, but as the camera was manipulated to scan the walls, something caught the light. Another metallic glint, different from the watch. "There," Emma pointed. "Can we get a closer look at that?" The technician adjusted the camera, bringing the object into focus. It was a bracelet, caught on a protruding stone about 15 feet down. As they watched, the camera revealed more. A cell phone, badly damaged but recognizable, and what appeared to be fragments of cloth. The atmosphere around the well grew heavier with each discovery. Scout began to whine more intensely, pacing back and forth along the well's perimeter. Emma felt her chest tighten as the implications became clear. This wasn't just about one missing person anymore. Captain Richardson's voice cut through the tension. "All right, we need to drain this well. Get the pumps set up, and someone get me a line to the state police. We're going to need more resources." The process of draining the well was painstakingly slow. Each foot of water removed revealed new horrors, personal effects, pieces of clothing, and eventually, what everyone had been dreading but expecting, human remains. Emma found herself working alongside forensics teams, carefully documenting and recovering evidence as it emerged. The well, she learned, was deeper than anyone had realized, with a narrow chamber beneath the water line that had been hidden for generations. It was here, in this secret space, that the full extent of the tragedy began to emerge. 3 bodies were eventually recovered, each telling its own story of violence and loss. Rachel Morgan was identified quickly, but the other victims had been there longer. One was matched to a missing persons case from 2 years ago in a neighboring county. The third would take more time to identify. Throughout the recovery operation, Scout remained at his post, his eyes never leaving the well. It was as if he understood the gravity of his role in uncovering these crimes, in bringing some measure of closure to families who had lived with uncertainty for so long. As the day wore on and news crews began to gather at the garden's perimeter, Emma noticed something else, a pattern in the recovered evidence. Each victim had been wearing similar jewelry, delicate bracelets with custom charms. Trophies, the forensics team suggested, taken from previous victims and given to new ones. It was a signature, a way to link the crimes together. The implications were clear. Someone had been using Millbrook's peaceful community garden as a killing ground, hiding their victims in plain sight. and they might still be out there, watching as their crimes were finally exposed. The investigation expanded rapidly, drawing in federal resources and media attention. Millbrook's quiet charm was shattered, replaced by a growing fear as residents realized a predator had been walking among them, perhaps for years. Emma found herself at the center of it all, praised for taking Scout's behavior seriously when others dismissed it. But she couldn't shake the feeling that they were still missing something crucial. The well had given up its secrets, but the killer remained free. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Mary Chun, reviewing photos from her garden plot's security camera, noticed something odd. A man walking a dog that looked remarkably like Scout, visiting the well late at night when the garden should have been empty. The footage was grainy but revealing. The man moved with purpose, familiar with the garden's layout. And the dog. It wasn't Scout at all, but a similar-looking German S. Hefford. Someone had been counting on that similarity, using it as cover for their activities. Emma studied the footage with growing excitement. The man's face was never clearly visible, but his movements, his build, even the way he handled the dog. It all spoke of someone who knew the area intimately. He's local, she realized, sharing her thoughts with the investigation team. Someone who knows the garden's history, who would understand about the well's hidden chamber. Someone who's been here long enough to be trusted, to move around without raising suspicion. The team began cross-referencing garden membership records with dog owners in the area. The list of potential suspects narrowed quickly, leading them to focus on one individual. James Harrison, the garden's groundskeeper for the past 5 years. Harrison had access, knowledge of the well's construction, and most importantly, a German shepherd named Max who could easily be mistaken for Scout in poor light. But when police went to question him, they found his house empty, signs of a hasty departure evident. The manhunt that followed gripped the region for days. Harrison had vanished, but his dog hadn't. Max was found abandoned at a shelter 2 counties over. And with him, a final piece of evidence. A bag containing more charm bracelets, each representing a life taken. A story ended too soon. It was Scout who ultimately brought the case to its close. During a search of the garden's storage sheds, he began exhibiting the same intense focus he'd shown at the well. Inside, behind a false wall, they found Harrison's trophy room, photographs, personal items, and detailed records of his crimes stretching back years. The discovery led to Harrison himself, hiding in a cabin in the White Mountains. When confronted by law enforcement, he surrendered without resistance, as if relieved that his dark secret had finally come to light. The aftermath brought both healing and change to Millbrook. The well was sealed permanently, transformed into a memorial for the victims. The garden, after a period of abandonment, slowly came back to life as the community refused to let one person's evil destroy their shared space. Emma often visited, watching as new flowers bloomed around the memorial, listening to the sounds of children playing nearby. Scout, finally released from his vigil, had become a local celebrity of sorts. His story had spread far beyond Millbrook's borders, featured in newspapers and television specials about remarkable animals. But to those who knew him best, he remained simply a loyal companion who had refused to let evil go unchallenged. The garden itself underwent a transformation. What had once been a simple community space became a symbol of resilience and healing. The sealed well, now surrounded by a circular garden of white roses and forget-me-nots, bore a bronze plaque commemorating both the victims and the dog who had brought their stories to light. Each spring, when the flowers bloomed, people would leave small tokens, photos, letters, and occasionally, charm bracelets reclaimed from Harrison's collection, returned to the families who had lost so much. Sarah Foster had considered moving away after everything that happened, but ultimately decided to stay. "This is where Scout made a difference," she would say, watching him play with children who visited the garden. "Running away won't change what happened, but staying helps us remember how one small act of persistence can bring truth to light." Emma's career took an unexpected turn following the case. Her experience led to her becoming a specialist in K-9 assisted search and rescue operations. She worked closely with various fire departments across New England, helping to establish protocols for incorporating animal behavior into emergency response assessments. The Scout Protocol, as it came to be known, had already helped solve several cold cases and had prevented numerous potential tragedies. The town of Millbrook itself would never be quite the same. The innocence of small-town life had been shattered, but in its place grew something stronger. A community that had faced darkness together and emerged more vigilant, more connected, more aware of both the evil and the heroism that could exist in unexpected places. Captain Richardson, who had initially dismissed Scout's behavior, became one of the strongest advocates for animal-assisted investigation techniques. He kept a photo on his office wall. Scout sitting proudly beside the well, Emma kneeling next to him, both illuminated by the morning sun. Sometimes, he would tell new recruits, the smallest voices carry the most important messages. Our job is to learn to listen. The Garden's membership actually grew in the years following Harrison's arrest. Where some might have expected people to abandon the space, instead they came together, determined to reclaim it. New plots were added, including a children's section where local schools taught students about growing food and flowers. The darkness that had lurked in the shadows had been exposed and expelled, allowing light to flourish once more. Scout lived out his years as a beloved figure in Millbrook, his gray muzzle and gentle demeanor belying the crucial role he had played in bringing justice to the victims. He continued to visit the garden regularly, no longer standing guard but peacefully watching over the space he had helped transform. Children would gather around him, and Sarah would tell them his story. Not the gruesome details, but the importance of paying attention, of standing firm when something seems wrong, of giving voice to those who cannot speak for themselves. Emma's visits to the garden became a ritual of sorts. Every Wednesday, she would bring coffee and sit on a bench near the memorial, sometimes joined by family members of the victims, sometimes by fellow firefighters, and often by Sarah and Scout. They would talk about healing, about change, about the strange ways that tragedy can strengthen the bonds between people. The case had changed Emma in profound ways. She found herself more attuned to the subtle signals that animals gave, more willing to trust instincts that couldn't be immediately explained by logic or procedure. Her work with other departments often brought her back to Millbrook, where she would share the story of Scout and the well as a testament to the importance of paying attention to unexpected warnings. As the years passed, the garden flourished in ways no one could have predicted. The memorial became a place of both remembrance and hope, where the darkness of the past was acknowledged but not allowed to overshadow the present. The well's sealed surface became a canvas for seasonal displays: spring flowers, summer vegetables, autumn gourds, and winter evergreens. Each changing arrangement a reminder that life continues to grow even in places touched by tragedy. Scout's legacy lived on in unexpected ways. The local animal shelter named a program after him, training rescue dogs for service work. The fire department established an annual award in his name, given to individuals who demonstrated extraordinary persistence in the face of skepticism. And in the garden, a small bronze statue of a German shepherd stood watch over the playing children, a quiet reminder of the guardian who had refused to let silence bury the truth. The story of Scout and the well became part of Millbrook's identity, not as a tale of horror, but as a testament to the power of attention, dedication, and the unbreakable bonds between humans and animals. It was a reminder that even in the darkest places, light could find its way through, sometimes guided by the most unexpected of heroes. Emma would often reflect on how a series of small decisions, to listen to Scout, to trust her instincts, to persist despite skepticism, had led to such monumental changes. The case had taught her that heroism often began with simply paying attention, with refusing to look away when something felt wrong. It was a lesson she carried with her throughout her career, sharing it with new firefighters and rescue workers who would shape the future of emergency response. As Millbrook moved forward, the garden remained a testament to both the darkness that humans could harbor and the light they could bring forth. Scout's vigilant watch had ended, but the awareness he had awakened continued to grow, spreading like the roots of the memorial garden's flowers, creating an invisible network of protection and remembrance that would endure long after the events that had sparked it had faded into history. The well's secrets had been revealed, justice had been served, and healing had taken root. But perhaps the most important legacy was the reminder that sometimes the most important guardians of truth and justice could come in unexpected forms. Like a loyal dog who refused to leave his post until the truth was known, and a firefighter who chose to listen when others would have walked away. Years later, Emma would find herself training a new generation of firefighters and rescue workers, sharing the lessons learned from Scouts' vigilance. The training facility she established in Millbrook became known nationwide for its innovative approach to incorporating animal behavior into emergency response protocols. Departments from across the country would send their personnel to learn what had become known as the Millbrook Method, a comprehensive approach to investigation that valued both human expertise and animal instinct. The garden itself continued to evolve, becoming a living classroom where Emma would often conduct training sessions. The sealed well, once a source of darkness, now served as a powerful teaching tool. Every place has a story, she would tell her students, and sometimes those stories are written in ways we don't immediately understand. Our job is to learn all the languages of emergency, human, animal, and environmental. Sarah Foster eventually wrote a book about Scout Story, not focusing on the gruesome details of the case, but on the broader implications of trust, intuition, and the bonds between humans and animals. The book became required reading at police and fire academies across New England, its message resonating far beyond its origins in a small Massachusetts town. The impact of the case rippled outward in unexpected ways. Other communities began implementing similar programs, creating networks of trained observers who understood the importance of paying attention to unusual animal behavior. Several cold cases were solved as a result, each success adding to the growing body of evidence that supported the integration of animal behavior analysis into investigative work. Scout's influence extended even into the realm of technology. A software developer who had followed the case created an app that allowed people to report and track unusual animal behavior patterns in their communities. The app, named Scouts Watch, became a valuable tool for law enforcement and emergency services, helping to identify potential hazards and criminal activity through the collective observations of concerned citizens and their pets. The Memorial Garden flourished under the care of successive generations of Millbrook residents. Each year, new features were added: a butterfly garden to attract pollinators, a meditation labyrinth for reflection, and eventually, a small amphitheater where community gatherings and educational programs could be held. The space became a living testament to the power of transformation, showing how tragedy could be transmuted into triumph through the persistent effort of caring individuals. Emma's career continued to evolve as well. She became a sought-after consultant, helping departments across the country develop their own versions of the Scout Protocol. Her work led to the establishment of the Animal Behavior and Emergency Response Institute, ABERI, a research center dedicated to studying and documenting cases where animal behavior had played a crucial role in solving crimes or preventing disasters. The Institute's headquarters, fittingly located in Millbrook, became a hub for researchers, emergency responders, and animal behaviorists. They studied everything from historical cases to emerging patterns, developing new methodologies for incorporating animal awareness into emergency response systems. The work done there would eventually lead to changes in federal guidelines for emergency response protocols, officially recognizing the value of animal behavior analysis in investigation and rescue operations. Sarah and Scout's story became the subject of documentaries, academic studies, and even a feature film. But for those who had lived through the events, the real story wasn't in the dramatic revelations or the eventual capture of a killer. It was in the quiet moments of transformation that followed. It was in the way a community chose to face its darkness and emerge stronger, in the way trust was rebuilt and connection strengthened, in the way hope took root and flourished in the most unlikely of places. Scout lived to a remarkable age for a German shepherd, passing peacefully in his sleep at 15. His funeral was attended by hundreds, including emergency responders from across the country who had been touched by his story. The ceremony was held in the garden he had guarded so faithfully, and as Sarah scattered his ashes near the memorial, a remarkable thing happened. A butterfly landed on the bronze statue of Scout, its wings catching the sunlight in a moment that many would later describe as magical. The garden's rose bushes seemed to bloom more vibrantly that year, as if nature itself was acknowledging the passing of a faithful guardian. The community came together to establish a scholarship in Scout's name, providing funding for young people interested in pursuing careers in emergency services or veterinary science. The scholarship's motto, vigilance, compassion, understanding, captured the essential qualities that Scout had embodied throughout his life. Emma continued her work well into her later years, never tiring of sharing Scout's story with new generations of emergency responders. She understood that the true value of what had happened in Millbrook wasn't just in the lives saved or the justice served, but in the way it had changed how people thought about the connections between all living things. The well had been a place of darkness, but through Scout's determination and the community's response, it had become a source of light, illuminating paths forward that no one had previously imagined. The legacy of Scout and the well continues to grow, touching lives in ways that even Emma couldn't have predicted. Each year, when the garden blooms and visitors gather to remember, the story is told again, not as a tale of horror, but as a testament to the extraordinary power of paying attention, of trusting intuition, and of refusing to look away when something feels wrong. It's a reminder that sometimes the most important voices are the ones that never speak a word, and that heroism often begins with simply being willing to stand guard until the truth emerges. In the end, the story of Scout and the well became more than just a remarkable case study in emergency response or a testament to animal intelligence. It became a beacon of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest places, light can find its way through, guided by the unwavering dedication of those who refuse to give up until justice is served and truth prevails.